There has been nothing but positive news for The Last of Us Part 2 essentially since it was announced. It's been nothing but positive hype, and deservedly so. The Last of Us was one of the greatest games of last generation, a game that released on the tail end of the PS3's life cycle, much like The Last of Us Part 2 is doing here, but a game that has lived throughout this generation's life cycle as a remaster, and one of the best games on the system. Naughty Dog has earned their reputation between Uncharted 3 and 4, and Last of Us, their last three games have been nothing short of exceptional. But there's been this weird problem pop up that the entire gaming community has been talking about since Kotaku posted an article, an investigative piece, about a week ago. Jason Schreier wrote a piece about the culture of development at Naughty Dog, how it's working, how it's worked in the past, and where it's headed in the future. And what Jason Schreier wrote was kind of scathing. It was a serious indictment of Naughty Dog's work culture and the way they develop their games. But I think that there's some context and perspective that isn't being applied when a lot of people are talking about what Jason wrote. Now, I'm not here to tell you that crunch is not bad. I'm not here to tell you that bad working environments are great. But what I am here to tell you is that there's a context, a larger issue here in gaming that really doesn't have a whole lot to do with just Naughty Dog, that I think people need to understand going into this conversation. So let's talk about what the article itself says. We recently saw this demo, this gameplay reel of The Last of Us Part 2, and it was a relatively reasonable length, and essentially it was made to show off what the game was going to offer from a gameplay perspective. So here's what combat looks like, here's what the environments look like, here's how enemies respond, here's how the AI operates, and here's how you're going to control Ellie as an adult. And that's great. It's not new. We've seen a million gameplay demos over the years. This one was not in any way, shape, or form exceptional in how it was presented. But what people don't know about these gameplay demos is they're not just animators or game developers sitting down and playing a portion of the game and calling it a day. Oftentimes these little slices, these vertical slices of the game, the things you hear about behind closed doors or the things you see at E3 are actually these incredibly difficult to create, time-consuming pieces of the game that oftentimes aren't even what the final game will look like. And there's a reason you see so much of that. The reason is that these literal vertical slices are actually being developed congruently to the game. So the game's in development, and then this little vertical slices in development. Animators, developers, programmers are all working on this 6-minute piece that sometimes features systems and mechanics and animations that don't even exist with the regular full-force development team yet. This is an entirely different development process, and there's a huge rush, a huge push to get things done and create something presentable. In response to the article, a former Naughty Dog animator said that this is relatively normal for the studio. So normal that he actually quit because the lead up to this piece of gameplay was so harsh and required so much overwork and required so much crunch that a lot of the animators actually left. And he stated that the reputation within LA for Naughty Dog's work process and how they work their employees is so bad that the actual development team for Last of Us Part 2 had a problem finding video game animators to work on the game, and so they went away and searched for film animators. He said that had a normal veteran development team been on this game, they would have shipped Last of Us Part 2 a year ago. But because they've had to go into film and other areas and new developers with less experience because no one wants to work for Naughty Dog, according to him, the game has taken longer. Other developers that were spoken to said that the reason that Naughty Dog's success is so proven, the reason that their success has been so ubiquitous across all of their products is not necessarily because of the talent, but because of Sony's deep pockets and their ability to fund delays to get these projects out years after they're supposed to be finished. Now, we've heard something kind of similar about Kojima at Konami. Part of the reason that that's what happened, apparently, is that Konami no longer wanted to fund Kojima's very precise and extremely expensive and time-consuming vision for the Phantom Pain and his projects in the future. And the expose that Jason wrote goes into detail about Naughty Dog's culture, that they provide food, but they also work you hundreds of hours a week, and they don't force you to go into work for hundreds of hours a week and work overtime and work weekends, but it's encouraged. You get promoted and rewarded if you do work that extra time, so it's all but required for anybody that cares about their career. And look, Crunch is not great. Overworking anybody is not great. Not paying people for the overtime the way they deserve to be paid is not great. But, and this is a small but, it's a silver lining here. Naughty Dog does produce phenomenal games. Uncharted, The Last of Us, they have a track record this past 2 generations that is nothing short of exceptional. And if this is the culture they've used to create those games, then yeah, they've created great games. But the question is, at what cost were those games created? And I think that's what everybody has been wondering after this article is released is the cost, the human cost that it takes to create something like A Last of Us Part 2 worth the results, worth the game that's released? And you hear 2 arguments. The first argument is, well, if you want to make great games, crunch is required. And the second argument is, I'd rather have a bad game than have people suffer making it. So I want to kind of not play devil's advocate so much as to kind of talk about why this happens, why the culture is way bigger than Naughty Dog, and why this is a much larger conversation with a bit of nuance to it. So let's talk about how games are developed. Game development is not like a film, right? I guess it's in a microcosmic kind of way and in a very reductionist kind of way like movies are made, but the moving pieces are much larger. With a film, you have a direct beginning to end process, right? You have your screenplay, which is then optioned or bought or greenlit, and that turns into things like planning. And if let's use an animated film for example, storyboarding, and then you hire your actors, and then you plan a production schedule, and then you shoot on that production schedule. So if you have a 60-day production schedule, each day of the production schedule is plotted out scene by scene, moment to moment, minute to minute, script page to script page. And so you know each day how far behind you're getting, precisely to the day. And you can do that each and every day of the production. And then once that's done, you have the same timeline for editing, animation, special effects, blah, 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 blah. The point is that because a film is an hour and a half piece of entertainment, a 2-hour piece of entertainment, and because the pieces of that are so easily identifiable, it's quite simple, not simple to make, but simple to understand where you need to be from point A to B to C. With a game, these things take years of full development, 3, 4, 2, 5, 6 years of full development, and the industry itself, the way games are played, the way people engage with them, what people want, changes each and every one of those years. So does the scope of your story, so does the scope of your gameplay, so does the scope of your mechanics, so does the scope of the things you want to include, and eventually, day 1 looks nothing like the game you're making on day 375, or 450, or 500, and so the development cycle is different. You have this timeline, but suddenly you're doing a lot more than you thought you were going to do. Or even the same amount, and it's just taking longer because the technology is changing, the technology is becoming harder, or the things you want to do are more difficult than you expected. And with a film, you just kind of move on, or find a way, or spend a little bit more money, but no amount of money helps a game be developed faster when you're talking about a large AAA studio that has the staff it needs to develop a AAA game. I'm sure The Last of Us Part 2 is going to be great, but I'm sure it took hours of overtime. Hours and hours of overtime that, importantly, should be paid. That's the key. These people should be compensated for the overtime they're working. It's one thing to create a culture where overtime is encouraged, right? Every job in the world has something along those lines, right? I live in Manhattan. I have friends that work on Wall Street. Their jobs are awful. It's not just encouraged, it's downright silently said. As in, hey, if you don't stay this weekend and get this done, you're fired. Or, hey, if you don't stay this week and get this done, guess who's getting your promotion? Sherry. And I know you hate Sherry. You share a cubicle. She's the worst. That culture is everywhere. It's everywhere in a high-pressure environment, and it is really everywhere in tech. It's impossible to escape in tech, especially in places like LA and San Francisco, where this culture is all but ubiquitous. This isn't just a video game problem, but let's talk about video games, right? Here's the reality of the situation. Sure, I don't like crunch as much as the next guy. I think people should be compensated fairly for their overtime, and more importantly, I think that people's health should come before video games. But let's look at, and this isn't a but like those things aren't real. This is a but as in let's look at the other side of this. Let's take The Last of Us Part 2. right? Let's take the crunch away from it. Okay, how long does it now take to develop the game? Does it make it out this generation? Probably not, at least not the way they're developing it. Does it take 2 extra years? Probably. And then how much money does that cost the studio to not get another product out for 2 years? And then if it's taking too long, well then what does the studio do to make up that money? Do they shove a bunch of microtransactions into the game to make that money back that they would have lost by putting out 2 games in that time frame? Do they put out another really crappy product, a multiplayer game that hasn't well fleshed out, it isn't well thought out, Fallout 76, to try to make up that money somewhere else? What happens if you remove the crunch? That's kind of the culture of business, right? And that's the real problem with where we're at with the industry. Naughty Dog is on a double-edged sword, and by on it, I mean sitting directly on it in an incredibly uncomfortable way. They want to create an immaculate game, a piece of art, a game with a narrative that's unrivaled in gaming and gameplay that is up to par with that narrative. And they want to do that while also making sure that their business makes enough money and while also making sure they don't have to stuff a bunch of crap into the game to make the people investing in the product happy. That's the key, right? And their way of doing that is to get people to work harder and for longer and for maybe less money so that they can get the game out on time and they can get another game out even sooner so that way that money comes in and they don't have to stuff it full of that crap. Now, I'm not here excusing Naughty Dog. Their work culture sounds awful. But what I kind of want to articulate is, I guess, my understanding of the unfortunate reality of modern AAA gaming. There's really only 2 ways to do things now. You can push and push and push to get a great product out that isn't filled with a bunch of crap, or you could fill something with a bunch of crap and maybe not push quite as hard and maybe not crunch quite as much, but make more money and maybe focus more on the next product. I mean, let's look at Apex Legends. Apex Legends is fun. It's a good game, but it's not exactly setting the world on fire anymore, and that's because at the end of the day, maybe a standalone battle royale like Apex Legends didn't have quite enough content at launch. Maybe it didn't get quite enough content as it went on. Maybe things weren't quite as fleshed out as they should have been from the gate, and that's probably because the team was working on Titanfall 3 and then shifted their attention to Apex Legends because Apex Legends could make more money for the publisher. Starting to see the problem. Crunch sucks. Overworking humans sucks. But at the same time, there needs to be an industry-wide revolution of sorts, an industry-wide change in how we view the products in front of us and how we view the studios. And this comes down to us too, right? People do still get upset about delays, and I don't think the people watching this video, the people in, I guess, what you consider a hardcore gaming community, are the people getting upset about delays. I think most of us understand that delays are almost always good things, almost always great things for a game, with the exception of games like Anthem and probably Fallout 76. I don't think a delay would have helped that game very much. But I think we know for the most part, with the exception of EA and maybe even Bethesda at this point, delays often result in better games. Delays often result in more finished products and more feature-complete products. I guess the problem with all of tech and video games at this point is really simple. You have to make a decision. Yes, it's easy to say people should work less and people should not work overtime, and I agree. If you're working 130-hour weeks and you feel like you have to and you're not being compensated appropriately, this is a huge problem. But again, what is the solution to that? Well, one solution is just hire more people. Okay, well, then you have to spend more money. Then you have to make more money back. And you might say, well, more people would make the game done quicker and you get more games out, but it wouldn't, right? Because you're trying to offset the crunch. And even more important than that, oftentimes bloating a development team, as we saw with Mass Effect Andromeda and Anthem, can mean bad things, miscommunication, and things that don't quite congeal or come together because there's too many people with their hands on the final product. So let's just move past that idea. Then there's the other idea, which is reduce the scope of your games. Well, okay, that's fair enough. So let's say Last of Us Part 2 comes out and it's a 6-hour experience with no multiplayer. How stoked would you be? I know you can say, well, if it's a great game, who cares? People care. You and I might respect the fact that it's a great game even though it's 6 hours, but if I'm spending $60 on something, maybe not me, but third person plural, the random gamer walking into Target, the mom buying the game for her son who has never played Last of Us before, you're probably not going to be happy, and the masses are not going to appreciate, especially probably traditional media, that the game is 6 hours long. I mean, the conversation will start from there and only go forward. I mean, again, you have to market this game, and what a great marketing point for a $60 game is this game can be finished in one sitting. That's not a great marketing move. It doesn't mean a game needs to be 40 hours, but lowering the scope of something may not exactly result in the sales you're looking for anyway, so let's dust off that idea. You can take longer to make the game. That's a great idea, that's true. But then how does the business make back the money they're losing by not getting out as many products? That's probably going to be microtransactions. It's probably going to be a bunch of DLC. It might even mean cutting pieces of the game out and selling them later. It might even mean pushing out a crappier game in between. Is that something you want? It's not something I usually want, but there is kind of another option, and I think this is the best option, the way to resolve the crunch crisis in tech in general, which is loosen up the greed belt. And what I mean by that is you can make a lot of money by releasing a game once every 7 years. You know how I know this? Rockstar does it. You know how else I know this? Because I understand how finances work. If you make a great game that people want to buy, you don't necessarily need to have a profit margin of $300 million every single year, or $200 million. What if you could just make a profit margin after paying your employees of $100 million? Is that not good enough? What about $150 million instead of $300? Or what about instead of $600 million EA, you could make $200 million and maybe put out less crappy things? Now I know you're thinking, well, that's not how business works. The point of business is to make money. That's true. It's also not to kill the people making the things that you're developing. It's also to create environments where people want to make the things that you're playing. Because I have news for you. If people working on the games you want to play are happy, the game will be better. I promise you that. That is proven time and time again with any medium of entertainment or art. If people are happy, it shows. There's a simple solution to this. Make less money if you can afford to make less money. EA, Bethesda, Sony, Naughty Dog, all can afford to make a little bit less money. Am I angry at Naughty Dog? Am I not going to buy this game? No, of course I'm going to buy it. I'm very excited, and I hope and pray that this release is kind of a wake-up call for them, even though according to Jason Schreier, they've had wake-up calls in the past and they didn't wake up. They ignored the wake-up call. So that may or may not be true, but the reality of the situation is we can only understand this from the outside. We can only take what Jason wrote and run with that. We don't really know what that environment is like. But it's up to us to kind of ask for it to be better, even if you keep playing the games, which is okay as well. But now I want to know what you guys think. Do you agree with my solution? Do you think there's a different solution? Do you just not care about crunch at all? Does crunch just not matter to you? Let me know the answers to any of those questions down in the comments below. Let's have a real conversation. Yes, I am back in a new set, finally. It's still not done. The lighting needs to be fixed. Camera angles and stuff. The shelves, it's going to get better. I promise. But I am back. This will supplement other regular content, news content, reviews, impressions, which I'm also going to be identifying moving forward. The content isn't changing. I'm just going to identify what it is you're clicking on before you click on it, so you can click on the things you just want to watch. So if something's a review, it'll say some kind of review. If something's an impressions video, same thing. News, same thing. And then this style of discussion video, same thing. But I'll figure that out and let you guys know. Again, content's not changing, but identifying how you identify that content will. Yeah, if you enjoyed this video, press the subscribe button. If you haven't yet done so, also press the little bell. Nice subscribe button. Just make sure you're notified when I upload. Helps me a lot. Helps you actually get the videos. So press subscribe and the little bell. And right now, next to me, I think, somewhere around the mic, are 2 more videos from the channel that I've done recently. You can check those out for reviews, impressions, news, whatever they are. I won't know until I actually upload the video. And until next time, guys, I'm out.